I always like to make sure that the information that you're getting is getting deep enough into the cells of who you are, which is a really interesting conversation. Um, I am not a traditional human design teacher, and some of you know this, and some of you have had conversations with me about this. And yet, I would say I also think I am a very, very traditional human design teacher, in the sense that I am a person who actually studied with Ra. And if you go and you study human design anymore in some of the bigger organizations, and this isn't about me versus them, so that's not kind of where I'm going. It's more that the thing that they don't have or didn't don't have not had the experience of is the experience of actually learning from Ra in person. And you don't get this experience even from watching the videos. There was something very magical about sitting with Ra and learning from Ra personally. I am a very visual learner. If you know my chart, I have almost all of the definition of my chart is in my head gates in 63 and the 64, which are the gates of the eyes. And for me to learn and remember, I have to write. And when I was in school, I would write, volumes and volumes of notes. I would never really go back and look at them again, but I needed to write them when I was taking class. And when I would study with Ra and sit through his lectures and travel with him and go to all the workshops and trainings, I never took a single note, never. And it was the most bizarre experience. You could sit with him, and it wasn't just me, nobody took notes. You could sit with him for 8 hours straight. And it literally would be like you closed your eyes, took a 5-second cat nap, and you woke up and it was the end of the day, and you hadn't taken a single note, but you remembered everything. Which brings me back to my point. There is a certain cellular transmission, I think, that came with learning from Ra. And I'm not saying that nobody else can teach it. I'm not saying that nobody else can transmit it. I'm saying it was a transmission, and in however way you want to interpret that. And you can hear, if you listen to the videos, sometimes the difference between Ra speaking and the transmission that came through Ra. You are going to find, if you haven't already found this out, and for some of you who are more new to it, that human design does take root in your cells. It starts to change your perspective. It starts to change the way you see things. You start to understand things differently. And I'm hoping that some of you even have that experience that's so delicious and juicy, where you're in the shower and suddenly you go, oh, I never thought about this thing in politics, or this thing in the economy, or this thing in my kitchen from the point of view of human design. And all of a sudden now you have a different understanding. I think the other thing that's really interesting about human design is that it is a mutative system. And I actually am really consciously making sure I take the word system out of human design at this point, because you can't have a system that teaches people how to find their own inner authority. It doesn't make sense. That desystematizes the system, because you're making an assumption and you're operating from an understanding that when you give people power to tell their own story, a third of them by design are going to stick with the system, because that's about the number of people who are more logically defined. Okay. And 2/3 are not. And that disrupts the system. And we're in a cycle astrologically that it's all about disrupting systems. So let's disrupt the system a little bit. And so much of what we know in traditional human design, the more vehement points that I think some people are adamant and fight about a lot in the interesting human design community are aspects of the information that came later, much later than the original inception of the information. In fact, the information about the personal health system, the information about variables, thank you. All of this stuff came later. And actually type itself didn't come right away. Type came like 15, 16 years later after the information came out, 1978. Yeah, no, it was about 10, 12 years later. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because, first of all, it's in you. You're going to start seeing, if you haven't already, continue to see the world differently. And I always joke, you don't get to choose human design, it chooses you. And when it chooses you, you'll do everything you can do to follow it and learn from it and be in its flow. And you may even try to quit it. I've tried to quit it in the early stages of my career. I tried to quit it a lot. Like for the first 10 years, I was like, not doing this. This is not what I want to be doing with my life. And I never was allowed to quit. It always showed back up and gave my little sacral something to respond to. And poof, there we went down the rabbit hole again, right? It's in you and it's mutative. And the way you're going to learn it this time is the product of the mutation through me for 20 years. And it's going to keep mutating. It'll mutate through you. You're going to get your own understandings. You're going to get your own perspectives. You may take it in a completely different place.